Come in, come in. Did you enjoy those adverts? No, me neither. Mister, I thought he was a bad one all along. Why don't you take a seat beside Mr. Too Many People and you covering it up? I'm sure you'll have a lot to talk about. Hello, I'm Andy Luke, and I'm going to talk about the allegations against Neil Gaiman and why everyone on the internet is wrong. This video is largely about media. I don't think it needs a trigger warning. If you think otherwise, let us all know in the comments. Let's start right with where we are, YouTube. Unless you have Mr. Beast or H-Bomber Guy level coverage, you can't even name this topic without standards muffling your voice and nabbing your wallet. More vitally, though, the world's largest broadcaster is so grown up they stifle use of the R word, which gives out the signal that naming the topic is troublesome and unimportant. I'm not going to bleep the word out. I will refer to the act and acts of its type generally as violation. British media published the results of their investigation early July 2024 with another voluminous piece in an article in Vulture 8th of January 2025. Inevitably, each has met with commentary across the rest of the internet that, if printed up, would form a generously sized library. There's been the usual parade of Fruit Loops and ignoramuses, and thankfully many more progressive, rational voices. Sadly, 99.99% seem to respond to the news typical of a culture affected by the legacy of Rupert Murdoch and other tabloid sleaze. Outrage! Fundamentalism! Capital letters on every word. Every one of you is obviously a philanthropist or a demon. The tortoise and vulture pieces are the source for the trickle-down effect, obviously. Broadly, they're categorized in two genres of journalism, crime and entertainment news. And these are the narrow ways in which we've been trained to speak of them. It's a style of reporting and editorial definition we grew up with. It's how we've been trained to think, although most of us grow out of it. And in case you haven't realized, well, we're all journalists now. I'm going to explore other ways we could be doing how we talk about this on the internet. I'm going to refer to the Vulture piece and how you formed your opinions based on it. That's because it's a primary source. It's recent and not necessarily as a criticism. Writer Lila Shapiro has done a number of things right with it and was previously behind the expose on Joss Whedon. If you feel Gaiman is a monster or he did not do these things, I respectfully disagree with you. But neither of those should be the focus. It's not about Neil. Part 1. Scarlett Pavlovich, the famous people, Gaiman's violation. He's famous, you know, and he wrote Sandman. Do you remember that bit in the Sandman? The Vulture piece opens with a long Simpsons comic book store guide drawl on the work of Neil Gaiman and colours of detail on the celebrities and his life in New Zealand. It's an embarrassing level of detail, not just in the public domain, but things he's known for through big brands and big publishers. It's kind of the default way of writing journalism of this kind. The crimes he's accused of are unsettling, but so is that entertainment news approach. What seems to have affected many readers is that Gaiman is a perpetrator. For myself and many of his readers, he was the last person who would commit multiple violations. We trusted him. He cultivated the personality of a really nice guy, an ally, and an advocate. Shapiro's story doubles down on this sympathy, keeping the focus on Gaiman the individual. She has less to say in this piece about wider culture and society. 1 in 3 women have reported being violated in their lives. That's a terrifying figure and a well-verified one. I know there are men out there and women who maybe haven't even heard that. So let's say 1 in 5 even. Every person knows someone who's been attacked in that way, even if they don't know who. We've all got women in our lives, all got mothers, friends, neighbours, And if or when you hear their stories, although all cases are different, it may not be unlike the stories Scarlett Pavlovich relays to Lila Shapiro. But this first segment makes an unusual choice in style of writing. Settling the scene is painting with words, poetical, lyrical. Shapiro writes a perfect, almost fantasy scenario before GAIMAN approaches with intimidation and danger, a storm cloud. Her primary objective is to prove to people GAIMAN is a monster, that he's left victims in his wake, to make sure he doesn't have a career where he can do that again. But beyond that, is there a point to this article? Could this happen to people who aren't celebrities, who aren't surrounded by soft colours and beautiful smells? When there's a monster in the rose garden, does life just stop? And this is where we come in, because we pick up where Tortoise Media and Vulture left off. If we can say something about someone in this story, we can say something to the people around us immediately local. We can say, I'm sorry this happened to you. It wasn't your fault. You survived. Obviously, you did the right things. Thank you for telling me. I'm always here if you want to talk. Can I do anything for you? You can comfort people. Bring a cup of tea and a blanket. Play soft music. Make the environment comfortable. Offer to accompany them to the first therapy session, and at the same time look after ourselves. Helping yourself helps a survivor. Don't be afraid of silence, and aim to find the difference between being supportive and overbearing. These are guidelines from an article, What to Say to a Violation Survivor, that appear at Pandora's Aquarium or pandies.org. It's a volunteer-run website for female and male survivors and their supporters. There's many useful reads, videos, a large forum for people to share stories and advice. As a secondary survivor myself, I found it powerful in my own healing. Crime and entertainment writers frequently use a structural device of flashbacks and narrative, and to talk about a character's memory of trauma. In fiction, flashbacks are waved off like the blink of an eye. This is because they can take much longer to pass, and they're much more intrusive, much more setting a new environment and experience down upon the person who suffers them. Popular culture rarely addresses what we, the audience, should do about them. So again, I'll quote from the same article on Pandies. You may want to assure the survival of the flashback is not really the event happening. Turn a soft light on. Turn triggering music or television shows off. Get to know the survivor's triggers as well as you can. Help to ground the survivor. Encourage them to take slow, gentle breaths. Tell them they are remembering. Softly remind them of where they are. Ask them to describe their surroundings to you. Point out the fact that the abuser is not present. Remember, they may not be able to respond, but will be aware of your voice. Be careful about using touch, the arm, the hand, definitely not the stomach or the thigh. While very upsetting to the survivor, a flashback can be an opportunity to learn, to understand, and to validate their experience by breaking through blocks placed on the memory. Don't press them to talk about it, but do be open to discuss what happened if they want to. Social media has made headway from legacy media. It's not uncommon for someone to write something prefaced with a trigger warning, or to go on an internet comment thread and see genuinely practical advice being given about this sort of thing. We all need to educate one another and transform what is considered news or commentary. Blaming the victim or excusing the violator is behaviour that has grown out of the mudsling media that the powerful have left behind. And when we employ those tones and patterns, it's because of an incapability of seeing the bigger picture. Part 2. Toward its media recap and impact. Pavlovich's childhood was harsh. Amanda Palmer is famous for advocacy. Look, researching this area is tough. The facts and the detail are harrowing. But if you can't dip your toes in the water of those facts for when you publish your opinion to a platform, well, maybe you should. Here, publishing to the internet and surviving abuse have something in common. Communication is key. Talk about how you're feeling and what you each need. And also, do not feel obligated to share more than you're comfortable with. Personally, I feel a duty of care to warn people about others who pose a risk. But by the same token, I've also felt that very few people want to hear me badmouth someone, even though it's really painful to do so because it's like reliving the experience. I don't need anyone's guilt on top of my own. Neither of them should be there. So here's a message from me when I replay this video. You're not alone. You're not inherently bad. You're one person trying to survive. I've seen some mighty dumb remarks this week about Pavlovich, Palmer, and the other women mentioned, as well as GAIMAN himself. They all have in common poor education, a lack of understanding of this type of abuse, that these women went back to the person they said violated them and they craved more. So it's no big deal because they are money grabbers or they just misunderstood. Your sexual organs do not have a brain. They cannot distinguish between a mauling violator and a gentle touch of a lover. Orgasms may also have been one of the repertoire of dirty tricks violators use to get their victims to feel responsible. They feel as if they are sick to have enjoyed sex with somebody who was also violating them. They may question whether they were violated at all. This is the nature of the attack. Different people heal at different speeds. There's an article by Ljerka on Pandies where she talks about recovery from trauma being like carrying a boulder and turning a boulder into a pebble. The initial pain is crushing. It sucks out all the light. It's too heavy. The further you walk with it, from it, the smaller it gets. You can carry it like a stone, a pebble. And Claire also goes on to talk about this type of attack and the parallels with stages of grief. Number 1, shock and denial. It can't happen to me. Maybe downplaying it. 2, fear, panic, and shame. What do I do now? Just a feeling of no control, like feeling that the world is turning under you. You can feel the world turning under you. 3, rage and or helplessness. How dare someone do this to me? And this is a need to exercise it, to lash out, to wind out that rage. And here there's self-responsibility misattributed. 4 is guilt and ambivalence. Damned if you do or if you don't. And this is where you absolutely need supporters. You need friends, you need maybe therapy, keeping a journal, online or in real life support from people who understand and or are willing to understand. 5, focused anger and letting go. Finding the good out from the bad. Some rage is helpful. Some rage will stabilize us. It helps face this ominous shambles of stifling knots and it helps us to untangle it, to speak. We're sadder, yes. Wiser too. These attributes inform our decision making going forward. We're different now. Surviving brings its own gifts. And 6, exploration and new identity, or going from victim to survivor to thriver, even if you're scared. The path after Such a trauma leaves us feeling vulnerable, but also fluid, and there are new strengths and weaknesses. This level of violation goes to our core. The upshot is it gives us new insights on so much of existence, not just on violation, but everything of us. It's a transitional stage, and we owe it to ourselves and other survivors to find our best to move forward. Part 3. GAIMAN was raised by Scientologists and may have suffered some of the abuses he subjected Pavlovich to. GAIMAN has a book about his traumas, a thing for violating babysitters, and he evicts a mother of 3. As I mentioned earlier, many felt GAIMAN was the least likely to do what he's accused of. At this stage, it's important to take all those positive attributes we previously thought of as GAIMAN's, the advocacy and the outspokenness, the moral stances, and see that we have made them our own. Going back to this article, I've seen the Scientologist angle thrown about a lot. Disappointingly, I might add. Sure, they're a dreadful cult. Shapiro unearthed some terrible things that happened to GAIMAN at a young age when he was vulnerable, probably imprinted and conditioned. But like the reference to The Ocean at the End of the Lane as his trauma novel, it seems a bit of an easy out. Secret supervillain origin. And if I'm wrong about that, I might be wrong. Then I am. Lundy Bancroft wrote for Berkeley Publishing in 2002 about the sort of support we can offer survivors of abuse by partners. In Bancroft's words, the principle to keep foremost in your mind when you want to make a difference to a woman in an abusive relationship is to be the exact opposite of the abuser. And I'd imagine the same thing goes for men too. The abuser pressures them severely. Then be patient. They talk down to them. Address them as an equal. If the abuser thinks they know what is good for them better than they do, then it's our role to treat them as the expert in their own lives. If they dominate conversations, we have to listen more and talk less. If the asshole believes they have the right to control another's life, we should respect the right to self-determination. If the abuser assumes they understand a partner's children and their needs better than they do, it's our role to assume they are a competent, caring parent. We don't think for them, we think with them. Abuse victims often blame themselves. Please know that it's not your fault. Your choices did not lead to your assault, instead, to your survival. When we encounter common victim-blaming arguments, it gives survivors an internal script. And that script can be in a state of constant rewrites, thoughts which are second-guessing, overly self-interrogating. Could this have been done? This instead? I did this. Should I have done this? What about this? Enough. Someone else made the choice to violate you. They should have prevented themselves doing that. It should not have been done to you. The responsibility of violation is always on the violator. Is that story enough for you? I'm sorry. If you watched this far, I'd really appreciate it. Seriously. You've gone some way to restoring my faith in people. Our final summary from the Vulture article. Part 4. Sustained brutal assaults on Pavlovich. She and Palmer create their distance, but keep him in orbit. The monster of serial habit. I've already talked about the confused emotions due to the physical type of violation, and it's well documented how in other circumstances the abused return to their abusers with matters of control in the mix. The attacks relayed by Pavlovich are particularly violent and detailed. They're a difficult read. This is why trigger warnings exist. Amy Mena, writing on the Violation Trauma Syndrome, RTS, talks about accompanying feelings to loneliness, being frozen, feelings like they've left their body, a level of disarray where lack of trust wrecks other relationships. You see, violation isn't only an assault on one person. It wrecks communities. It contributes to a feeling inherent in many survivors, the feeling of being lost. It's a crime that may have set off a domino falling effect of intrusive symptoms, rising negative cognition, a sense of a loss of integrity, of personal control, personality changes, and damage to personal identity. Victims may feel alienated and withdraw from social groups. They may show poor performance or feel a need to overperform. There may be reactions of social instability and addiction. And so one of the most important things Lila Shapiro does in her investigation is give the survivors a chance to tell their story. See, the violation's not the story. The surviving it is. It's those little paragraphs at the end where the lights come in and the survivors share. And I'm going to take a few educated guesses on what they shared. I think it went something like this. You're not rubbish. The shame you feel is not yours. You always have the right to say no. The abuse is not normal. If you feel you're going to self-destruct, find someone who can help you. Keep looking for them. Keep finding. Join a website like Pandy's and talk with people who will help. It's not easy, no, but it will give up results. There are other options in caring, finding a therapist, thinking about safety in our bodies, environments, and relationships, and learning to live within your window of tolerance. That's learning our own defense mechanisms and doing the things to keep ourselves safe and calm. There are practices for being in the here and now, practicing exercises of grounding, centering, alignment, walking, breathing exercises. All of these go some way to helping you recognize what to do for yourself or someone else if there's a worry of feeling overwhelmed, in anxiety or panicking. Louise Palmer in How We Healed, writing for the US Self magazine 2007, is among those reporting that only 7% of those reported violations go to trial, with 1% of the accused being convicted. That was 18 years ago, and nothing's really changed. That figure hasn't moved. I've seen, and you probably have, plenty of people write, the victims will get their justice, which is a big problem. The social care, policing, and legal situations are all ridiculously skewed against victims being able to report. Those willing enough to come forward are often victims of police negligence, CPS negligence, court negligence, not to mention press negligence, though most understand reporting on specifics of cases in progress is an offence. And some reputable press sources don't get that. Generally speaking, the focus on Neil the culprit is part and parcel of a media which would rather focus on culprits than survivors, resources, and root causes. I want to say a word about hospitals and the police. There are a number of utilities hospitals and health centres can provide victims. These are geared at collecting evidence and processing it. It's unfortunately ordinary that survivors may not want this recorded or processed when the justice systems are evolutionarily broken. I feel you should suggest this institutional help, especially as to healthcare. It's particularly important in the hours after the attack. However, it may be a victim to survivor does not want to go to the police. You can tell them you go with them, support them every step, let them know that. But someone who doesn't want to report the crime will tell you nothing will be done. It'll be a sterile, unfriendly process, that they'd be shamed by the police or the courts, the people they know, that they can't speak up publicly, which is where this path often leads. There were no witnesses. The perpetrator has far more sway. And I frigging hate this, but you can't force the issue. So there are important things you can say. It was not your fault. The person who did this to you is to blame. What you did was survive it, and that was the right thing to do. You can get through this, and you're not alone. I'm always glad of a like, comment, and subscribe. This time especially a share. There are links to the articles I used in the description, and Pandies have a donate button if you'd like to say thank you for their great content that I've used willy-nilly. Check out my latest books, the Garth Marenghi-styled Coastlines After Dark, which is there, and launching today, actually. I'll probably be at the launch party while you watch this. Is a novel I edited, Holly Miles Another Time. It's a story of a teenager surviving in Ireland, on the verge of repealing the laws against abortion, but not quite there yet. So links in the description again. Survive and thrive, okay? Bye.